Thumbnails are very important in enticing an audience to click on your video because after all, it's the first thing that people see. That's why you always aim to make something that can easily grab anyone's attention. There was this phase in YouTube when everyone followed a particular format. Oh, you know what I'm talking about. The red circles, the red arrows, the heads with the unhinged jaws, you know, the usual. But the icing on the cake that people still do until now is oversaturated colors. I know creators bump it up to catch children's eyes, but that's my kryptonite. Whenever I see it, I just look away because I hate it. Of course, I'm not here to talk about my personal nitpicks, though it left me wondering, what is it like making these thumbnails? What if someone made a game that roughly captures that process? I mean, you saw the title of the video, that is exactly what. Before I explain my idea, I feel the need to subject you to an obligatory 45-minute segment exploring the entire detailed history of thumbnails. As I was saying, I want to make a game where you recreate a thumbnail by dragging elements onto a blank canvas. And we have 4 different thumbnail designs. We have the vertical, the horizontal, the collab, and the and the game grades you based on your accuracy, aka if you selected the correct icons, the distance from the actual positions, etc. And after further brainstorming and expanding my mechanics, I think it's time to make it happen. I started my process by creating the assets for the game. Quick disclaimer, I would not recommend that as your first step. You should probably focus on prototyping and seeing if your concept actually works. In my case, I just wanted to see how my game would look like and ultimately just get that part out of the way. I began my asset creation by working on the faces. And each person will have 4 different facial expressions because apparently that's all we need for a thumbnail. So they could be surprised, confused, mad, or laughing. And after going on a bit of a tangent, I successfully have all the test subjects, the people that I will ever need. However, we're not yet done. We have to come up with a bunch of subjects for our videos, so what are some good topics? I'll write down cats, you can never go wrong with them. Cars are a good shout. This random emote that totally has no cult around it could also work, and then yeah, I think that's all we need. Once done, I went to fancade and recreated my assets by stacking them all on top of one another. I then used arraycast to scan each layer and assign them to their respective object list. Wait, you're recording already? Alright, just tilt the camera upwards. That's good. So that part is done. It was simple, it was easy, and it took me 2 days to actually do it. I don't know, I just had a lot of things to do and I couldn't possibly juggle them all at once. Let's continue to our next step. The game will have 3 stations. First, the game shows a thumbnail the player has to copy. The player then heads to the workstation, where they are given a selection of icons and symbols to drag to a board. Once the player is done, the game compares the 2 thumbnails and provides a score based on how well they did. With that being said, let's focus on the first station. I constructed a brown area with a gap in the middle to make room for a thumbnail. I set up the camera, added some deco around the border, and started coding by generating a random colored background. That's when I quickly realized that brown is an awful color, so I switched to black to provide more emphasis to the thumbnail. I then had the game decide what type of thumbnail it wanted to show. Don't mind this number, even though you probably didn't notice it in the first place and me doing this only brought my attention to it, but anyways, don't mind this number. I originally planned for 5 designs, but one was kinda redundant. Just remember that society could have been so much better if it was 5 instead of 4. I made this handy little block that handles all element related data and used that info to properly position and rotate our icons onto the board. And after quite a tedious process, I made a system that spawns all necessary elements and tells them where to go. Now obviously the game can't show the thumbnail forever, that's not how it works! That's why the next thing on my list was to add a timer. I cloned a lot of small grey blocks, placed them below the board, and set their visibility based on a variable that's slowly counting down. I think I did a lot of work for the day. I'm going to call it for now. I'll come back to this first thing in the morning. Oh wow, that idea was terrible. Yes, it works, however, it also feels incredibly rigid. Primarily because I solely relied on hiding and showing stuff. So let me present to you a trade offer. I will be taking those grey cubes and in exchange, I will be giving you a single grey line. How's that sound? Here's the plan. That block is slightly rotated so only a part is visible. I then spent some time tuning and tweaking offsets and adjustments and ended up with this. Afterwards, I switched the camera to have a perspective view. To all the orthogonal believers, don't worry, we'll come back to this very soon. Once the clock strikes 0, the game takes the player to the workstation. I made the game create outlines to guide the user, and this took unbelievably long due to one big reason. I forgot that since I stacked them, they all have different Y values. Technically, so two outlines will have different heights even if they share the same vector position. Eventually figured it out. I also implemented a smooth animation of the board scaling up. Not to brag or anything, but fancade doesn't have any feature to scale objects, so how did I pull the trick? Well, they say that a magician never reveals their secrets, but I'm not a magician, so let me tell you. So I created 4 blocks, placed them in the middle, moved them outwards. Yeah, that's it. Next, I added a mat to hold all of her stickers. By the way, I changed the angle of the camera. Told you I'll come back. Only to realize I'll probably face some future problems, especially with dragging and placing icons, so I reverted all changes. I also made the mat larger and gave it a checkered pattern. I then focused on adding the controls. Every time the player touches the screen, the game gets the coordinates and translates them into world space. Next, it loops through all the icons and chooses the closest one as their current object. While the player holds the screen, we also update the object to follow along. And once the player lifts their finger, the game checks if the icon is within boundaries. If it is, it stays there. Otherwise, it returns to its original position. It works, but there's an issue. In cases where the object is too big, like those giant rectangles, you'd have to tap at the center as you're likely to pick up something else if you didn't. My solution was to use a raycast to detect a hit object and go through all the blocks to find the one that matches. So now I have 2 methods of detecting touch input. You might be wondering, isn't that redundant? Well, yes. However, we must account that our demographic will most likely play this game with a phone. I mean, we're using a phone to make it to begin with, and some of us have the unfortunate case of the big digits. We can now drag stuff to the board. That's awesome, but wait, did you see that? This outline doesn't match this head. Turns out I was off by 1 pixel when making the layers for this face. I won't be worried about it, I could just ignore it. It's a minor mistake and I won't be affected by it. The intrusive thoughts one. Finally, I made a button with an upload symbol that takes our player to the checking station. I made a white area with a giant hole and filled it out based on the screen orientation. I then had a thin black line going across because of an artistic choice. The great divide that brings the contrast between the new and the old. I copied all the stickers and used the necessary data to mimic the 2 versions. That works fine for the gold thumbnail, but the player's thumbnail needs some adjustments. We only want to duplicate the icons inside the actual canvas. That's why I used a boolean to determine what goes in. I encountered another problem. Large objects can seemingly protrude through both boards. So, I took the element size into the equation and increased the distance between the 2 boards. I wanted to use a like to dislike ratio for grading the thumbnail to be thematic with the idea. I created a sprites for a thumbs up, a thumbs down, and the numbers 0 to 9. I also used the same trick earlier to animate the bar increase. To provide an actual grade, the game checks if the number of elements in both thumbnails is equal. That score is subtracted by the distance of those objects. We then display the final value with the blocks we made earlier. I used the like and dislike icons to indicate the player's performance. If they pass the vibe check, they return to the first station and the cycle continues. Otherwise, womp 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 womp. Before implementing a difficulty curve, I added a timer to the workstation to give more pressure to the player. The game has to get harder each round to make it more challenging. So what do? Step 1. Decrease the timer. That is a no-brainer, but we need that nonetheless. Step 2. Remove the outlines. We won't do that immediately. Instead, we take one every 3 rounds. That way, the player now has to rely on their memory. Step 3. Bring some extras. Let's sneak in some decoys. They're all similar to the other ones so we could confuse the player even more. At the start of the game, we'll guide the player like the good parents that we are, you know, baby steps. Then suddenly, when they least expect it, that's where we kick them with confusion. The best part is, they won't even realize it. That self-doubt is going to accumulate over time and eventually, when they inevitably fail, womp 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 womp. Finally, I added some polish by tweaking the difficulty curve and bringing some sound effects. Well, we successfully made a game. Here are my final thoughts. The idea is interesting. Copying things as a core mechanic has been done before, but I think my interpretation of using thumbnails made it more creative. The gameplay is okay. It has the right mix of accuracy, memory, and speed to bring an entertaining playing experience, but I could also see it being a bit repetitive. The code could have been more optimized. I had a handful of missteps throughout the thing that could have been easily avoided if I had been more efficient with my script. That's it. I hope you enjoyed watching me explain my process. Making this video was such a breath of fresh air, so I definitely plan on doing more stuff like this. And if you want to see more, please rate this video 5 stars, bookmark it, and follow me to have a chance to win my free oxygen giveaway. It is 100% legitimate, so please do it. Anyways, I'll see you in the next one.